go léir accordia agus tá fáilte ród. Welcome to Be My Guest with me, Mary Honan, on Lear Media TV, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary. And my wonderful guest today has an extraordinary story, one I'm not sure I'd probably be able to undertake myself, but she's an amazing woman. And her story is absolutely fascinating. It's Heike Phelan. Hello, Heike.
Hi, Mary. How are you?
I'm very good. Heike, you're originally from Huddersfield in the UK.
I am.
But your name is of German origin, Heike. Is there?
Yeah, my first name's German, courtesy of a German mother. And of course, my last name's Irish, courtesy of an Irish father. So a bit of a mix.
So you're German-Irish, born in the
UK. Indeed.
I was born in the UK as well, to an English father, Irish mother.
Yeah, it's these days it's hard to admit to the British side of it with the disaster that's going on.
Yeah, well, I don't know. At least they're getting the vaccines. More than what can be said, I suppose, here in Ireland. But Heike, your story is absolutely fascinating, because in 2012, you married William Matthew Schiffert in a high security prison in the United States, where Matthew is serving 75 years in prison for a knife attack in 2001.
That's right. Yeah, it was actually someone else who committed the crime, but he actually got a longer sentence than the guy who did it, who's now out on parole. So how
Heike, I have to say I'm at a loss as to the way the system works in the United States, because depending on the state you're in, let me be very clear from the outset, I'm vehemently opposed to the death penalty, because I would rather a guilty person go free than an innocent person be executed.
Well, that is what the law is meant to be like, but you know, the US system is baffling to most of us outside of there, and indeed baffling to a lot of Americans as well. I mean, most of them don't even...
Sorry for interrupting. Yes. It's baffling to me that every state is so different. Somebody could be in prison for life for 3 strikes, and they might have stolen a bag of potato crisps.
Yeah.
But because they had 2 other prior convictions.
Yeah.
And then somebody could get the death penalty for one accidental murder, if you like, and somebody then can get 6 months for, well, not 6 months, but a couple of years for the murder of many people. It just there just doesn't seem to be any parity in the sentencing.
None at all. It's almost like a postcode lottery, and not just between states, but between counties in states as well. And, you know, Texas and California tend to do very much similar things. Texas will often follow what California does. Now, California recently has been bringing in a lot of reforms, so it can only be hoped Texas then follows suit, because, you know, it seems to be quite a spoken about thing at the minute that this year, more than any other time, is the time for reform, you know, because it's been a growing movement towards reform because of the huge problems in the system. And now with COVID, this past 12 months, it's shown such massive problems in the prison system that they're just not able to handle, and they've no real desire to handle.
But I mean, we'll get to the COVID situation a little bit later, because I can imagine that in a society where they're asking people to socially distance and wear masks and that, it must be relatively or virtually impossible in a prison system to actually maintain a safe distance from the people that you're actually living with. But Heike, how did you get to know William in the beginning? I know it started with pen pals. Were you just somebody that wanted to write to a prisoner because you felt you felt, and how did you come on William?
Well, it wasn't even that I was looking to write to somebody. I knew somebody in the California prison system, and I'd through somebody else, and we'd been writing as friends for a few years, and I participated for his benefit in a Christmas card swap on that's run by a prison support website called prisontalk.com. So if you put somebody's name forward, they then sent you a list of names that you were to send Christmas cards to as well. Yeah. And one of those cards was William's friend, who said, I'm not bothered about that, do you want it? And he said, yeah, I'll have that. And he actually said, as soon as he took the envelope, he said he knew, you know, which I still find quite bizarre. But, you know, that's what he always maintains.
It's not the conventional romantic meeting of two people, one who is in complete freedom, if you like, and one who is away for, gosh, 75 years. Seems like it's a bizarre amount of time to actually. What actually happened? What was William's story?
He had actually been driving a car with a friend of his, and they'd gone to meet a friend of William's friend at some motel she was living in. Now, he was sitting in the car whilst he went to see her, but he ended up in an altercation with somebody else. And William didn't know the friend had a knife on him. And when he came back to the car, he said, oh, this is what I've done, and this is what's happened. And so because they'd arrived together, even though William had no knowledge of this crime, he was convicted as equally responsible, because there's a law in Texas called law of party. So anyone remotely connected is deemed equally responsible. So that's the law he was convicted under.
Mm-hmm. But how could Williams get a sentence of 75 years and the perpetrator of the crime is out on parole?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, his previous record was held against him in the trial.
So it's three strikes.
It wasn't even under 3 strikes. It was just, you know, shown as trying to show he's a habitual offender, and therefore he wasn't entitled to any sort of leniency. So that's where the sentence came in. So he has to do 30 before he's eligible for parole, unless some of these reforms come in the next year or two, in which case he would actually be eligible for parole as of 6 years ago under the potential reforms. Okay. And so he could possibly be out in the next couple of years.
What are the chances
Fingers
of that?
crossed.
What are the chances of that?
With the way the reform movement's going, there's a very, very good possibility of that. There are quite a few reforms being put in motion that are being sponsored by certain senators. So, you know, he would benefit from any one of 3 or 4 So there's a good chance. So it's fingers crossed
I mean,
time for sure.
I'll be perfectly honest, putting your unbiased hat on and looking at it from the victim's point of view, you would say to yourself, as somebody who's, as I say, utterly against the death penalty, I do believe that life should mean life when somebody kills somebody. But in William's case, you say that William was in the car when the assault took place, and the assault was perpetrated by his friend. So in that case, he just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, one would think. And I would imagine that anyone thinking logically about this and putting a humanitarian cap on would have to say that it was disproportionate to the crime, because he wasn't involved. He wasn't assaulted. No. He was there. He was witness, but he's been treated as somebody who was involved in the crime purely because he happened to be in the car. Have you ever doubted? Have you ever doubted?
Well, I don't need to doubt because you know, it's not that I say he wasn't involved in it. That's in all the trial transcripts.
Excellent.
So it's not just me saying it because I want it to be true. Yeah. That is fact. Yeah. And you know, the trial transcript is online, so it's not a case of me just, you know, rose tinted glasses, because that's not me at all. You know, but this is the whole problem with American so-called justice. It is very disproportionate. I mean, as far as the for anyone who kills, it should be a life sentence. Yes. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that either. We don't have that in Europe, and you know, so many other prison systems, particularly around Europe, have been shown to be far more effective by understanding and acknowledging that, you know, people change over time. You know, whether you're perpetrated a crime at 18 and you come out at 30, or whether you perpetrated that crime at 35 and come out at 50. You know, even in the space of a few short years, we all change, and the European system at least recognises that and does give people that second chance. And this is something that American so-called justice doesn't recognise at all. It's a very, it's vengeance rather than any type of rehabilitation.
I got my tea.
And you know, without rehabilitation, you're not helping people even to change and acknowledge what they've done, or show any type of remorse, or preparing them for the free world again. So it's really quite a poisonous situation, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy to not rehabilitate for when people come out, because that just then leads to them coming straight back into the system because they don't have the tools.
Yeah, but can you understand, and I'm being devil's advocate here, can you understand where from the victims' family perspective, whose family will never get that opportunity to be rehabilitated or to live a life, and they want justice? And for me, justice, to me, the death penalty is barbaric. It's just absolutely barbaric, because if one, the way I look at it is, if one group of people deem it wrong and immoral and against God and against everything to kill it, to take another person's life, how can they say then that in the eyes of the law it's okay to stop another person from breathing? That to me is, you know, an oxymoron. It doesn't work, and it's immoral, and it should be done away with. We here in this country, it's really, what is it, 15, 20 years in Ireland, and you get out with good behavior. And I do believe that people can be rehabilitated. And I do believe that people make mistakes, they get in with bad crowds, and after a few years, they realize and they're remorseful. But what has anyone, any human rights lawyers taken up his case?
Couple of years ago, one of the Innocence projects came into his unit and actually accepted him as a client. The problem with the Innocence projects, and there are many of them, they're so underfunded and overworked that it can take years and years. The chances are he'll actually be out, you know, himself without that before anything happens there. You know, I was quite surprised when they took him on, because, you know, there are so many instances, I mean, of wrongful convictions. You know, innocent people have spent years in the system. Innocent people proven innocent in America who can't get out because of the court system. You know, it's really quite shocking. I mean, they do say potentially up to 30% of people in US prisons are innocent or not guilty of what they're charged with.
And of course, in US prisons, you've got this system as well in some of the prisons where it's it's financially expedient for these they're like businesses being run like businesses, where you have and mostly young black men who are imprisoned for the rest of their lives for maybe 3 strikes, and they're there purely to work and to make money for these financial institutions, basically. And it's I just don't understand it, Heike.
You're absolutely right. Well, and this is something that really, really gets my goat, and this is something where I feel that I don't call myself an activist for the prison reform or anything, because I'm certainly not. But I have to advocate for my husband, because, you know, the system is just so, I hesitate to say corrupt, but that's what it is. It's also so exploitative, and it's the exploitation that is so shocking. I mean, they're supposed to not be slavery these days, but the Texas prison system in particular, the inmates are forced to work. They get no pay whatsoever. They can be working 12, 16 hours a day, you know, out in the fields, in the machine shops where they make some. They have what's called Texas prison industries, which make billions and billions of they're making products for free world companies who are benefiting from free prison labor, and there's none of that. None of those profits go back into the Texas prison system. And then on the other side of the coin, it's the families of inmates who are being exploited, because everything in there, even though he is in a state prison run by the state, there are a lot of private prisons in Texas, but even in the state prisons, the level of profits that are made from the families and indeed the inmates, right from commissary that they can purchase, to phone calls, to letters, emails. The Texas have recently started prison video visitation, because there's been no in-person visits for almost a year now, so they've been forced to do that. It's $10 for 1 hour, you know. The email system run by a private company, one email or one page for an email costs the price of 1 stamp. If you look at the federal system, in prison system, they're emailing for nothing. Their phone calls cost maybe a penny a minute. You know, Texas recently had to lower the cost of the calls, but last year we were paying $5 for a 20-minute call. Now it's just under $2 for a 30-minute call. But even so, you've got 80% of inmates who have no family or friend support, no outside support. They don't even have money for commissary to, make their lives a bit better in there. The food is atrocious. They have his unit, most of the units there, they have working farms, they raise animals, they grow crops. Minimal things from the farm are fed to the inmates because they go for profit in the free world. So they're buying food in, substandard food that's often out of date, unfit for human consumption.
Have you have you brought any of this up? I know you've been on other stations and that, and other shows and that, but mostly here in Ireland. Have you brought this up, say, to the authorities, or are you afraid? Would you be afraid to bring it up in case William would suffer as a consequence of
you know what?
That's part Irish and therefore gobby.
Yeah. Do you know what? That is actually a great question, because the level of retaliation against inmates when a family member or loved one actually complains is very high.
Yeah.
Now, I'm fortunate in that William's been in and out of the system for so long. There's nothing about the system he doesn't know. He knows most of the officers. He knows how to talk to them, how to handle them, whatever. Now, and this is where my advocacy comes in, because whenever I have complained, I'll only complain when it's something really serious. For instance, I've had to put, I frequently have to complain about the negligent medical care, which is atrocious. It's got to a point where now, as soon as they see an email from me, they're on it, because they know I'll take it further. And the thing is, over the years, due to the negligent or non-existent and substandard medical care, he developed testicle cancer. That wasn't treated until he was virtually dying and had to be rushed to the hospital. Was it 4 years ago? He had complete kidney failure. Again, it collapsed before they took him to the hospital.
And he's in prison since 2001.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
He's in there now. 20.
It'll be 20 years this year.
20 years this year.
20, yeah.
So technically, he's, oh God, it's just an eternity. 20
yeah.
years.
It's a long time.
For one mistake, for one huge mistake, but one massive loss of life for the person whose life was taken.
Yeah.
But having said that, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time and with the wrong person, that your whole life changed. The other side of that retaliation question is that 3 times now in the past month, I've had to put complaints into the warden, and I always copy in the ombudsman as well. So they jump on it. And William has a peanut allergy. Now, during COVID, 98% of their meals for the past year have been sack meals. So it's basically a peanut butter sandwich and a boiled egg in a brown paper bag. That's pretty much what they get. Well, he has a peanut allergy. Now, it's on his cell door, as it is for anyone with any issues. And yet they're constantly bringing him peanut butter. There was the one time where he didn't actually get peanut butter in it, but there'd obviously been cross-contamination in the kitchen. So he'd had the allergic reaction, let him go to medical because the officer
you know, in his section at the time was one who didn't want to be bothered with doing anything, which is, you know, a high percentage of them. And so when he finally was able to call me, I sent an email straight away to the ward. They were on it within half an hour. Because it's so serious, that whole cross-contamination. And I always have to put in, he's not there on the death sentence. That is complete negligence.
But also,
duty of care. And I always have to put in certain words, legal duty of care, because as an inmate is a ward of the state, essentially.
But as well as that, it's also manslaughter at the very least, or attempted murder, if you like, at the very most. If they actually give him an allergen that they knowingly are aware of, that could possibly kill him.
Yeah, it happened again the other day. I had to put a complaint in 2 days ago because it was a sergeant who then brought it round. He then refused to change it and told him, eat it or not, I don't care if you die, all this sort of thing, which is fine. He's used to that sort of talk. It's how the way some of the officers talk is shocking, but then some of the responses, it's a vicious circle. But I sent an email in, and within 5 minutes, I had an email back from the warden saying, the major's looking into this. And I had a phone call a couple of hours later saying the sergeant was being interviewed, he was being interviewed. They were on it, but they're only on it because they now recognise my name as being serious. The other side of it is because I've written the 3 books in the series I've written.
That's right. I was going to get on to that in a minute, but before we go to the books that you've actually written on it, Heike, I would like to know how you actually got from Ireland to Texas and ended up actually marrying William. What you started off with the pen pals and writing. At what stage did you decide that you were going to take a flight, fly over to Texas and visit? There's a lot of determination in that, Heike. It's not something everybody would do. And I'm sure you were met with opposition, not least from your family. I'm sure, they must have worried for you, to be honest.
I don't think they knew about it at the time, but I just decided, about 18 months in, after writing for about 18 months, that I actually wanted to see if the face and the words on the page matched the actual person in, physical person. So I decided end of the tour season, one time I thought, well, I may as well make that my holiday and I'll go over there. So that's what I did.
I'm going over to a prison for the holidays.
Not every idea of a holiday, but that's what I did. Nearly roasted to death in the Texas heat.
And where did you stay? Did you have to find a hotel when you went there?
I just stayed in a hotel, got a rental car. It's the only way you can.
You work in the tourism industry anyway, so you were aware of how to navigate that.
Yeah. I just looked for the best hotel in the town at the time, and got myself a rental car, because for most of the units, it's the only way you can get there. You have to drive to the unit. There's no public transport or anything. So you need a car to be able to get there. So that's just what I did. And fortunately, he matched the pictures and the words in the letters. So yeah, I was thankful.
He was going to be all covered in tattoos.
Oh yeah, I knew that anyway. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, the head. I mean, when you see a tattooed head in person, it's a bit of a surprise. But he often has hair, so you don't see it then as well. It's when I turned up the one time and he'd tattooed my name and my middle name on his eyebrows. That was the biggest shock. And then told me it was my birthday present. You know, my response was, I don't remember that being on my birthday wish list. You know, but again, if he grows his eyebrows, you don't see it either.
So yeah, exactly. But the thing about it is, you were writing to him for 6 years. Then you went over and visited him. And at what stage did you realize this is the man? Were you married? You were married before, were you?
Oh, many years ago when I was young.
But at what point did you decide, and what was it that made you decide that this is the man I want to marry, knowing that you may hopefully you will, but that the potential was there that you would never ever spend a free day together, if you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's strange how it came about, because that was never the plan. You know, it was just when he actually wrote to me in response to that Christmas card, I thought, well, that wasn't the idea. It was just a cheer up thing. But he wrote this letter and it was very honest, told me what he was in for. It was very honest, you know, and I eventually wrote back, said, well, as long as you stay honest and I don't think you're lying, then we can carry on writing as friends. So I'd say it was a good couple of years for me, you know, before and after several visits, and I actually thought, well, you know, he matches everything he says. There's no hint of any lies or deception or anything, and it is something, if you're a bit, you know, clued up, you'd look out for.
Yeah.
You're definitely not, just like you would if you had any sense in a free world relationship. You look for inconsistencies and that, and there never were any. Everything he said was correct. You know, if he said check this out online or whatever, so it was, you know, after many visits, sort of, it was more a case of, you know, for me it was a growing thing, whereas he still maintained he knew as soon as he got that Christmas card before even opening the envelope. So, you know, I mean, I think we've been together 3 years when we actually got married. So.
And did you only stay for a short period on holidays over in the States and come back?
Yeah, because in Texas you can only visit at the weekend, and normally you can only visit for one day for 2 hours, one of the weekend days. But because I was coming from a long way, I could apply for what they call a special visit, which would be both the Saturday and the Sunday, and for 4 hours each day.
Okay.
So sometimes I would go just for a weekend if I could fit a weekend in. Sometimes I'd go for 2 weekends, but you can only do that special visit once a month. So I would go for the last weekend of one month and the first weekend of the following month.
God, I really looked forward to it, because on a human level, we know what it's like with this current situation and social isolation.
Yeah.
And I think people are starting to, I think anyone with an ounce of humanity in them would be wondering what it must be like for somebody like William to be locked up for 75 years and told that, okay, the rest of the world is out there and they're told to social distance and we can't social distance, but we'd give anything anyway to be out there.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, when they saw this COVID all first started, you know, they had them locked in the cell for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, which causes not just mental health issues within themselves, but there's so much antagonism towards the administration that eventually causes riots. And obviously that's something they try to avoid, you know, but it's a whole big problem because for weeks on end, then there weren't phone calls, there weren't visits, the mail room was not performing as it should. It was a whole host of problems that came from that. And in fact, it was the same over Christmas and New Year. They were because numbers were rising, and they're rising 5-6 times faster in prisons than in the free world. They were on 23-hour lockdown, only being allowed out for an hour for showers and
if you're dependent, if you're dependent your whole life or for the last 20 years for a phone call or for a letter or a card or just to hear another person's voice, that you know, added to the sentence that you already feel is just disproportionate to the crime, it must play with your mind. How is he keeping sane throughout all?
Well, I mean that is a huge problem, you know, because unfortunately their system is a very punishment system. That, you know, losing your freedom is supposed to be the punishment, even over there, but it's not. Once you enter the system, there's this punishment on punishment on punishment, and when you have COVID on top and they're locked in the cells for 23 hours a day, only let out for maybe an hour every second or third day.
That's really solitary confinement.
It is, yeah, and there are no phone calls. I mean, we didn't, over Christmas, New Year, we didn't actually have a phone call for about 5 weeks. There were no visits because the video visits were cancelled as well. There were no in-person visits. There's no timeline for those reopening. It could be another year. But also the mailroom, there have been massive problems in the mailroom. In fact, it's 2 weeks ago, and this is how bad it takes years for any investigation to come to fruition in a prison when it's against prison officers or prison staff. 2 weeks ago, the FBI agents went into the mailroom in Williams prison and removed 2 mailroom workers for mail tampering. They found bags and bags and bags and bags of unopened mail, both incoming and outgoing, shoved in the backs of cupboards. They'd been found to be throwing other mail away, shredding mail, and all this. And I mean, unless you understand anything of the system, you know, this is not just letters from family and friends going in now. You got legal paperwork. You've got, because of the way the court system is, once an inmate enters the system, once they've had their sentence declared, they have only 12 months in which to research the law, write their appeal and get it into the court. 12 months for what are essentially a lot of very legally ignorant people, naturally.
And many people who would probably be illiterate, it would have to be said, within the system.
Even just understanding the laws around your case and your sentencing, but they have 12 months to get their appeal into the court. Well, if you've got mail being sat there for 6-9 months, these people who could have had a change of circumstances in the appeal could now be sat in prison for the rest of their lives because of the mail tampering from these 2 mailroom people.
And is there any leeway given by the courts, given that they now know that the FBI have had to go in because of this?
It's doubtful because, I mean, you've got innocent people that have been proven innocent still sitting in prison because the courts won't reopen their case.
I saw a man there recently. He actually sang on America's Got Talent. Your heart, you'd want to be made of stone not to cry. A black man. He was 32 years in prison for a crime he did not commit, and the police knew he didn't commit the crime. Everybody knew he didn't commit the crime, and he had had several appeals, and all of them were turned down. And they finally found out through DNA testing that he wasn't. That he was no way had he any involvement whatsoever with the crime.
Yeah.
And 32 years he spent in prison for a crime. That man could have been sent in another state to the gas chamber.
Absolutely.
Or to the electric chair.
And this is the whole problem with the so-called justice system, right from the police who just want to convict someone, to the courts who just want to convict someone. You know, you've got, there've been several instances lately where judges have been found to be taking cash for sentencing. Exactly.
Yeah, but that's they're the financial prisons that they were sending. They were finding youngsters, mainly black youngsters, guilty and sentencing them to extortionately long sentences.
I mean,
they'd work within the prison system. That's
it is. It is very much the case that in the courts and the sentencing, you know, there is a bias towards black people to send them to prison, much more so than other races. Once they're in the system, there isn't a bias. They're all treated just as badly because, and actually, black inmates tend to run the prisons more than any other race because they are far more prevalent. So it's a bit perverse. And all these things we've talked about, I've actually written about in the books, and there's a lot of it in the book 3, the convict code one. You know, because a lot of these issues have been very prevalent.
Tell us about the first book that you wrote. Why you decided to write at all about it. And has it had any impact on getting attention to William's case?
Well, the first book I wrote was Child Convict. And when I decided to write them, it was more because I was so frustrated with the system, you know, because of having to advocate for his health care and be, you know, not poisoned with the food he has allergies to and things like that. So I thought, you know, people don't actually know what goes on in there. They see the programs like Lock Up and America's Hardest Prisons, which are all there, very sanitized and very carefully selected inmates for shock value and all this. But it's not the reality. They don't show anything really from inmate perspective, family perspective, and that's what I wanted to do. Starting as a juvenile with Child Convict that I did was merely because I wanted to do things in order, you know. So I started there, which is where he was in juvenile detention, and then went into an adult prison at the age of barely turned 16. You know, and then career convict carried on from that, but much later it was the start of this sentence he's in for, so there's quite a long gap. And that shows, and I've made him purposely because I had to write them as novels, not, you know, so as not to have any legal trouble with Texas Department of
you fictionalize them.
Exactly, although the events in there are all actually factual. But yeah, that I've made him purposely not likable, because back when I met him, he was still quite arrogant and full of himself, and still very much prison's fun. I'm not bothered if I stay here the rest of my life. I know what it's about.
But Heike, that's a form as well of defense. that's a defense mechanism. You know, a lot of people put that guard up to show,
Very much so.
I don't care, this doesn't bother me, I'm, you know, but when you actually manage to penetrate that armor,
Yeah.
you realize
Very
that
much
there's
so.
a human being behind there that has made
Yeah.
a catastrophic error.
Yeah.
And in his case, his biggest error was being in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong person.
With the wrong person.
And
that's right.
the wrong person happened to get a much, much shorter sentence than him.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. But it's funny because the administration seemed quite threatened by books, particularly this third one, Convict Code, because there's so much in there that they obviously recognise as true, because that's much more current. It actually also shows how he's much more of a changed character since the previous one.
I'm just thinking, I'm sorry for it, but I could be talking to a future celebrity, because I was watching a series that actually started, I'm way behind everyone else. It was on Netflix and I was just obsessed with it. I sat down until 7 o'clock in the morning for weeks just watching this Prison Break. And then everybody about Prison Break, and they were looking at me and they were saying, Mary, that's you're about 15 series behind. I was at the start of it, and it was just fantastic where he had all the tattoo on all over his body, the whole thing, and I was just totally gripped with Prison Break. Your books could be the next Prison Break series.
Well, one can only hope. I mean, it's a great series, entirely unrealistic.
Oh, God Almighty, absolutely. But
what I was going to say, which I found humorous, he told me the other day, because two of the majors told him when in the prisons, you know, in the officers' area, they have sort of a wall where they put up information and pictures about, let's say, contraband items, where they're found or how they're found or how they can be hidden, where they found them recently hidden. There was a poster up of where they just found 2 cell phones glued into the sole of a trainer, and that was up on the wall. And next to this poster were printed out copies of the front cover of all 3 of my books and put on the wall next to it as if there's some sort of threat. And I just thought that was highly amusing. But it's also, if you think about it, a little bit concerning, because you think,
I'm a dangerous.
that books are some sort of threat, because they have scrutinized all 3 to see if there's something in there that they can ban them on coming in the unit for.
But you know, when you see an effort to ban books, that is, to me, that is the definition of fascism. When you try to silence a person's voice, whether that voice is physical or whether it's through their writing. You mightn't like what they say, but you should certainly listen to what they say and argue and disagree. Whereas, like when we were talking earlier and you were saying that, you know, whereas I do agree that people can change, and I do, people can be rehabilitated. I also feel sorry for the family of those who have been taken, because their families are destroyed forever. And but the humanitarian in me will always say that there has to be a cutoff point. There has to be a point at which you say, well, you know, you see a person in prison and you see the way they are, and you see that they have made huge changes and that they're no longer the person that they were, and that they're genuinely making that change, and that they've genuinely no longer that threat to society, or that they were. Now, some can be very devious and can convince you, but generally you have an idea when you're working with people over a long period of time how they've changed. And they should be, I mean, there should be some does he do any education in there? Do they give them any educational like the ability to train as, say, lawyers or teachers, or to become educated, or is it all manual work? Is it all work?
They do have certain classes. I mean, if they don't have the high school diploma, then they have to take the high school diploma. Which is what they do in school at 16 years old or whatever, because a lot are, like I said earlier, illiterate, but a lot aren't, and a lot of them do want to do further education to, help them in the outside world. And there are certain jobs in there that, or trades, they can learn, but there are such strict criteria to those who are allowed to do some of these trades and classes that very few get to do it. I mean, the TDCJ website proclaims that, through work programs and the work they do, they learn skills for the outside world. But the overseeing bodies of certain trades in the outside world have said the qualifications they give them in the prison are less than worthless.
Yeah.
So, and they're already so disadvantaged when they come out, because Texas is very prohibitive in most places. Don't allow them housing, so they're going out onto the streets. Most places won't take them on with any sort of criminal record, so they're
going out into a world that they do not know, because when William went into prison, there wasn't really mobile phones.
No, he was at the beginning of mobile phones, but there were still bricks. Yeah.
A wheelbarrow to bring them along with you. But there's so much has changed in the world that they're probably not prepared for that world. But is he able to Zoom you?
No, the only thing we have is the video visitation, which is done it is like a Zoom or like a FaceTime thing. So we do have that. In fact, we have one tomorrow. But the minute, those are still only once a month, and there are only a few units have it at the minute because it's taking them time to roll out. But even again, TDCJ themselves can't afford to install all this system, so they've had to partner up with JPay, the company who do the emails and the calls. So they're paying for the infrastructure, but they're also making vast profits.
Yeah.
I mean, how many can afford $10 for 1 hour? It's a lot of money for a lot of people.
And they've probably had to work a lot. Yeah, they probably would have to work a long time within the prison.
Yeah. And I mean, I take the point, earlier about the victim side. But there comes a point where, the court system has taken care of that, the sentence has been said, and then you have all these people in prison. It's then what happens in there that becomes the biggest factor. The victims and that side will have all their support groups and whatever, and I'm not diminishing the victim side naturally, because obviously, who wants that to happen? Nobody does. But the thing is, we have prisons, whether it's here or it's there or whatever, and you have all these people in prison who are 80% at some point are going to come back out into society.
and commit and reoffend because they've learned things within the system that they hadn't even known outside, and they feel that
Yeah.
that cycle will continue.
Yeah.
That prison should in some way, if somebody is to spend, if somebody is given a sentence of 75 years, I mean, you know, what are they saying? Are they saying that they're just going to forget that person within the system and do nothing for them to either help them rehabilitate or educate them in any way, that if in the event that their appeals are successful, they're coming out as educated people?
Well, that's right, but the further problem is, because it's a very punitive system, you know, you have the officers are very poorly paid, so you know many of them are taking money from inmates or inmates' families to bring drugs in, to bring other contraband in, whatever. You got a very large majority of officers who have bad attitudes towards the inmates, towards the job, towards the place, and try to make things as difficult as possible. You have an administration that encourages that sort of behaviour and encourages what they do is keep the racers at each other's throats.
Yeah.
All they try and do is make it not so bad that it then results in a riot, but obviously it does. There's actually no, when that attitude comes from the very top, you know, it's very difficult to change it in the system. I mean, William's been in this current unit for 6 to 7 years now. The first 2 years, it was shockingly bad, so many drugs and all this business. There was wardens only do 2 years on a unit, then get moved on. There came a warden, and he was great. He cleaned the whole unit up. There was minimal problems there compared to before. The following warden carried that on. He was very good. He was very into inmate programs and them doing things and everything. The one that came next blew it all out of the water.
Yeah. Isn't that always the case?
This one now is trying his best, but he's not used to a large maximum security prison, so there are a lot of problems. There've been a lot of the rise in suicides in the last 2 years. The last warden, you know, was removed because the rate of suicides just skyrocketed.
You must be a very strong person, but Heike, there must be times that you sit back and think, what's happening with my life now? I'm here, I'm married to a man who I only see every now and again. I mean, my father lived in England till I was 13, 14, because he couldn't get a job. So I only saw Daddy once a year. Maybe twice. He came for my communion one year. He was to come another year, and there was foot and mouth disease, so he wasn't allowed in. So I understand what it's like to not see that significant person in your life, you know, and to look forward to seeing them once a year. But now with COVID, there's been, since March, coming up to a year now, that's coming up to a year you haven't seen William. And even if you did see William, you're only seeing him for 4 hours a day for 1 weekend, and then the normal hours for the second weekend. That must be very hard. Or is it a case of, you know, what is making your marriage stronger is the fact that you have your own worlds as well, and your two worlds collide whenever you want, you know, when you can get there?
Well, I mean, we're both very strong people, you know, and I knew what I was taking on once I got married to him, you know, and I knew this was the situation. I think the only thing different now is because, you know, we make the most of it and we have what we have. So that's why, we still carry on writing letters in case phone calls don't happen, but we value the phone calls. We value the video visits even more now, you know, but that's how it is for now. But the only difference now for me is that sometimes I think, oh my God, with all this, will he actually come out of there alive? You know, especially with COVID, his health issues. If he catches COVID, it will kill him. And like we were saying earlier, there's no possibility of social distancing in there. The administration make it worse. They impose rules and regulations. They say only 16 allowed in the day room at a time. But then the next shift comes on and they'll let everybody out. Or they say, you know, we're running a hot meal today. Everyone line up to go to the chow hall, you know. So they're running the whole building of 432 people in and out of there within half an hour. How can you social distance when you're in a cell with someone and you're lying 3 feet away from them? It's just that the testing is reluctant and very random. Fortunately, he's just been tested as negative.
And is there room at all for privacy there between you? I mean, how private can your private lives be? How is there a room, a place you can go to talk, or is there a place you can go for a walk, or that within the prison service when you go there?
No. I mean, our first visits were always behind the perspex glass because he was in segregation for the first 3 years. But even when it's a contact visit, it's just sitting across table from one another in a large room of other tables.
Like it's
Texas, that's visitation in Texas. Other states and the federal system do it totally differently, where you can go outside or you can, you know, maybe take a walk, but not in Texas.
I feel so, you know, I mean, it's just a horrible situation all around for everybody involved. Both the victims of the guy that was with William and William primarily more than this other guy, but everyone's a loser in the situation. He's so lucky to have you, Heike, and he is so lucky that somebody good came into his life, that, you know, when the time comes for him to be released, and God willing, the organizations that are working to try and free prisoners, God willing, they'll get his sentence reduced. But and at least he'll have you, a strong half Irish woman, German. You
That's
don't get
right.
within the two.
Absolutely. Yeah, he does realise he's lucky, and he says that every day to me. He never a day goes by when he doesn't acknowledge how fortunate he is to have me in his life, you know. And I appreciate that, of course, because it's nice to be appreciated and acknowledged. But you know, I feel equally fortunate to have him in my life, because, you know, I give him the things he needs. He gives me the things I need, you know, spiritually.
They're probably the things he missed. Had he had them as a teenager or a child, he may not have gone down that road.
Absolutely.
Because
yeah.
I'm not saying now for a moment that have been brought up in a bad environment or a bad home or a broken family, or that creates criminals, or that, because there have been some people who have managed to have wonderful careers and wonderful lives, who have grown up in abysmal conditions. Likewise, there have been people who have grown up in great families who have just fallen in with the wrong crowds. But for those who have had bad childhoods and have gone down the wrong route, it's great that they can suddenly find somebody in their life that actually sees the good in them.
I agree, and it's fun because, I mean, he had a shocking childhood, but I mean, he didn't even understand that most of his childhood was abuse until I pointed it out, because I mean, I had great childhood, just the sort of childhood you should have, with great parents. I mean, he had a family who, and I've actually, this is all comes up and written about in Child Convict, but his family gave him up for adoption, put him in a children's home at the age of 4. He was thrown out of there at the age of 8. His own mother gave him heroin at the age of 13. His family wouldn't let him back in the house at the age of 14. He was having to live on the streets, and then sort of all sorts of terrible stuff in between, which he had no idea was abuse, because it was just...
It was a disaster waiting to happen. His life
really,
was a disaster.
It was, but the thing, and this is something that I admired from him from the start, that he has never once used it as an excuse for anything he's done, even if it might have been. He's never used his childhood. He's never used anything as an excuse for what he's done. He's always acknowledged what he's done. He's taken his punishment. Even for this one that he didn't do, he's never said, I shouldn't be here. He's just got on with it, because that is how it is.
The worry I have with people in long-term prison sentences is that they become so desensitized and so used to the prison system that when they do come out, they don't know what to do with their lives.
Well, you know what? That's interesting, and something we talk about quite a bit, because he actually said one of the key things, it's not even necessarily outside support, but that is essential. He said it's keeping up with the outside world. So reading newspapers, watching the news, having discussions with others on it. He said, he said, the one and only time he never did that, he got out of prison and he was back in 6 weeks later.
Yeah.
Because he did. He said, it's actually easy, he said, and he looks around, he says he sees the institutionalization of guys around him. He said he's always worked very, very hard not to let that happen to him. I mean, obviously there are things where he is, because you can't not be, things with the routine, or this happens now, that happens then, this and that. But he's always kept his mind very active, always tried to do something to keep that from happening, so that he is prepared and it's not a shock when he comes out, so that it is easier to transition back. I mean, he even took he took a masonry class last year, bricklaying and building, all this sort of stuff, because they introduced it to the unit. He said, oh yeah, I'll give that a go. And he enjoyed it. He really enjoyed it. I mean, with his health issues, it was quite difficult for him, but he did it anyway.
Yeah.
There's a diesel mechanics class that I'd love to do, but it means moving to a different unit. So it's a case of, will we do that class on a medical unit? He's got to be on a medical unit, because they're all different sizes with different functions, and this is what makes it more shocking, that he's actually on a medical unit, 24-hour medical, also with a hospice care, and yet the medical care is so substandard and negligent, and that was one
that they give him food knowing that he's allergic to it.
Exactly, and then not treat them. I mean, he's on so many medications every day. Sometimes they'll let them run out for weeks. I mean, there are now 4 doctors on that unit who are not allowed to treat him, and one's the head doctor on the unit, because I've had to put so many complaints in about him not doing his job and all this. So they're not allowed to treat him. The system is just shocking. It's atrociously appalling, and it shouldn't be like that. If you're going to throw them into prison, then you have to do the right thing.
Yeah.
You have to at least take care of the basic medical needs and basic human needs.
Exactly. The
and those are not pets.
human needs should be the first thing that should be looked after.
Well, exactly, and they're not. I mean, we've barely touched the tip of the iceberg in this past hour of the things that go on.
I know. You know,
Yeah.
I was just thinking there to myself, Heike, I could talk to you forever about this because it's a passion that I have. It's a profound belief that in the abolition of the death penalty, number one, and educating people when they are in prison, because one day they're going to have to come out, and unless you actually start educating people who are out or who are in the system to be functional human beings when they come out, you're just going to get a rotary system where they're just going to go out and come back in again and go out and come back in again with no meaningful result from it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've started working on book 4, so that'll be out later in the year. So we can always continue the discussion another time.
You know something? I am of the belief, and I'm seriously of the belief, that this is going to be a Netflix series. Your book.
Well, fingers crossed. I hope you're right on that.
I think you will be. But until the next time, and until book 4, Heike Phelan, thank you very much for being my guest on Be My Guest.
Thanks very much, Mary. It's been great. Really enjoyed talking to you.
You're very welcome.